Thank you all for coming and being here. Um, I just want to quickly say, once again, thank you on behalf of the Trauma Center Coalition, on behalf of FLY, and to everyone who has supported this campaign. I also really super like to thank She for holding us down on campus, for being supportive, and just for being awesome allies. And so this event is hosted by She. And with that being said, I would like to introduce our host from She, Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna, and I'm a member for Students for Health Equity, which is the student arm of the Trauma Center campaign. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Before I hand it over to the band speakers, I just want to start out by looking at President Zimmer's now deeply ironic statement on protest and free expression. As some of you will remember, last spring, the Trauma Center Coalition, in the 5th year of its campaign, held a week of action calling on the University of Chicago Medical Center to open a trauma center. To kick it off, 9 protesters locked themselves into part of the administration building and peacefully sat in until they were arrested. In the wake of this and other protests, Zimmer sent out an email to the entire student body. You can see the entire text of the email on the screen. He claims that these protests, quote, violated the university's long-standing commitment to free expression, and goes on to say, antithetical to such freedoms are actions that prevent speech on the part of others, obstruct the ability of members of our community to listen, or prevent people in the university from carrying out their work. Then, shortly after, the administration banned the sit-in participants from campus. You will hear tonight about the silencing effect of this ban on campus discourse, an effect that this event is trying to fight back against. This ban shows that when the administration invokes freedom of speech, it is really just trying to protect its interests. The crucial flaw in Zimmer's definition of freedom of speech is it ignores the web of power dynamics that determine who has access to speech on campus. His statement alludes to popular conceptions of the university as a bastion of freedom of speech and expression. This overlooks the unique tools an elite private university like UChicago has to control the people on its campus. It owns a wide and ever-expanding swath of land and controls its own private police force. Thus, with very limited accountability, it can prevent any speech on its campus that it wants to. Of course, it chooses to allow a great deal of speech, but when certain protests or certain people actually threaten its interests, it can redraw the line between what is acceptable speech and what is disruptive to campus business. It can decide that the presence and words of its most powerful critics are disruptive to campus business and ban those individuals from campus. Since we're talking about the University of Chicago, the university's control over campus speech must be contextualized within its history of anti-Black racism. I look forward tonight to hearing different parts of this history revealed. It is worth noting that although the university has immense power over the surrounding community, its report on freedom of expression only extends formal protection to student and faculty speech. Thus, this event will trace the connections between denying the mostly Black Southside community a voice and denying their right to life by refusing to provide vital health care. I hope that we will leave this event with a renewed commitment to fighting against UChicago's racism in all its iterations. Now, I'll turn it over to our first speaker, who is a leader of the Fearless Leading by the Youth and the Trauma Center campaign, and, if you believe UChicago, public enemy number 1. Veronica Norris.
So I just prepared a really super brief statement about my experience both being a part of the Trauma Center campaign and both my experience with UCPD and UChicago itself, right? So, peace and good evening. If I'm reading this statement, it means I have not been arrested. And if I have not been arrested, then that means that the University of Chicago has for once done something that is smart. The University of Chicago would like to think that they have the ability to lock out and shut out the truth. The University of Chicago would like to believe that they have the ability to lock out and shut out the community. The University of Chicago would like to believe that they have the ability to silence young Black people. And I am here not only to bear witness, but to let anyone and everyone who will listen, and especially the University of Chicago and UCPD, that they do not have the ability to do any of those things. The University of Chicago is an institution that has occupied the south side of Chicago for years. The University of Chicago has added to the immense gentrification of Woodlawn and surrounding neighborhoods, the excessive policing of Woodlawn, Washington Park, and surrounding neighborhoods, and the all-out anti-blackness that we experience every single day as black people in this city and in this country. As our eyes are on Mizzou and other schools and universities across this country, we cannot just look and talk about what is happening there, but we have to look and talk about what is happening in our very own backyards. And as I have been a part of the Trauma Center campaign for the past 5 years, I have witnessed and seen not just how institutionally racist the administration of the University of Chicago can be, but how that institutional racism trickles down throughout the entire community. I am aware that as a young black person, as someone who believes in justice, as someone who believes in freedom, and as someone who believes in the right for people to fight for the right to live, that there are people who find that as a threat. And I am also aware that when certain people of privilege are threatened, they use their privilege to inflict harm, violence, and pain. And that has been my very experience. Ever since the Trauma Center campaign has escalated our tactics, we have been met with nothing but violence through the University of Chicago police. I stand here being dragged through a construction site. I stand here being pummeled to the ground and kicked by UCPD officers during a sit-in. I stand here being someone who sat in jail with other people for 48 hours for barricading themselves inside of a building simply to ask and demand for a meeting. We don't want much but the right to life and the right and access to care. And for this hospital, this university, this institution, this corporation to acknowledge that it would not exist, it would not stand, it would not live if it were not for the black people and the black community that has occupied and stuff and struggled to keep quiet. I stand here today because I won't be quiet. The Trauma Center campaign exists because young black people believe that we have a right to not only be angry, but to do something with that anger. The Trauma Center campaign won because young black people know that the best way to use our power and to exercise our right to life is to throw our bodies into the machine time and time and time again. And we have done that. And our allies have stood with us. All of you have stood with us all of this time. And for that, I am forever changed and forever grateful. I have no idea who I would be if it were not for this campaign, and if it were not for the members of FLY and the people who have shown me so much grace. I also don't know who I would be if it were not for the University of Chicago targeting me and terrorizing me, literally terrorizing me, for fighting for my life, the life of my people, and the life of my loved ones. So as we enter into this discussion and as we begin to tell you about the events of not only Alumni Weekend, but the events of what it took to get a trauma center on the South Side, I hope that you all understand that we resist because anti-blackness is real. And that it's not just the responsibility of black people to fight anti-blackness, but it is the responsibility of everyone who witness it, experience it, and knows that it's there to fight. So I hope that by the end of this night, you will be inspired to not only stand up against anti-blackness, but stand up against institutional racism right here at the University of Chicago. And I am convinced that your mere presence in this room is an example that you are willing to do so. Thank you. So at this time, I would like to invite Alex Goldenberg, Victoria Crider, and Marla Bramwell over to the table so that we can talk through a slideshow that we put together of Alumni Weekend, and so that we can also talk about the effects of not just Alumni Weekend, but the effects of what direct. It's still not a trauma center on the south side.
And y'all trying to kill me. I thought we was cool.
So through this slideshow, we're going to get into exactly what happened during Alumni Weekend, because there were a lot of lies being told on behalf of the University of Chicago, and we never really had an opportunity to talk about that. But we also wanted to talk about it because, like I said, there's no doubt in my mind that it's these type of actions and it's this type of power that led to the victory that we all witnessed. So since the beginning of the campaign, the Trauma Center Coalition and FLY has always targeted events that we knew the University of Chicago would be very vulnerable and very concerned about protests happening. And so we started our weekend of protests during Alumni Weekend with a barricade in which we barricaded ourselves inside of Levy Hall. We know it as the admin building for those of us who are in the community. We barricaded ourselves inside of Levy Hall because for this 5 years we've been begging for a meeting, demanding and begging for a meeting with both Rob Zimmer, Sharon O'Keefe, or Dean Polanski. So our demands were posted outside, as you guys can see, and about 9 people, some who are in this room, locked themselves inside of the admin building. So we were prepared to be inside of the admin building all Alumni Weekend if it was necessary. But obviously the University of Chicago Police was not having that. So you may not be able to see, but one of those demands and one of our very basic demands was to get a meeting with Zimmer. And Zimmer, Polanski, himself walked right past the admin building while we were there. And I mean that in a very literal sense. It was as if we wasn't there, as if our presence there didn't matter to him at all. And he was escorted and protected by UCPD to wherever it was he was going that day. And instead of Polanski or Zimmer, someone saying, okay, let's schedule a meeting with them, they decided to send in people, I'm not sure who it was, to break down one of the walls so that they can access us and haul us off to jail.
Fire department.
The fire department, thank you. So when they couldn't get to us, because obviously, you know, we were prepared for that, they decided to send the fire department on the outside to viciously break a window, crawl through that window, send police officers through that window to handcuff all of us, and then they proceeded to saw through the locks. While we were all in there, they decided to saw through the locks, and they hauled 9 people off to jail. We weren't really sure what to expect when we went to jail. This is not something that we just do on every Wednesday. But what we did not expect was to be in jail for 2 days. Typically, for those who are not really familiar with protest arrest, you get arrested at a protest, you're charged with a very small misdemeanor of some sort, and you're usually processed in a matter of 10 hours and you're released. The University of Chicago Police delayed processing as much as they could. We sat chained to a wall for 7 hours before we were even taken to lockup. And then once we got to lockup, we sat in lockup for 24 hours before we were even processed, fingerprinted, mugshot, and still wasn't really clear on what our charges was or when we would be released. But while we were in custody, members of SHE, JCUA, FLY, and many of our other allies held us down by doing jail support, lots and lots of jail support, by doing court support, And by making sure that everyone knew that what was happening to us was wrong and that the community was going to stand behind us. They also continued to have events that we had planned out for Alumni Weekend. So this is a photo of a prayer circle that happened that Thursday, in which some of you may know. The prayer for trauma centers happen regularly, weekly. And this very group has also been targeted by UCPD. They've been kicked out of hospitals for praying for a trauma center. But the great thing about our community is that we are faithful. And the students also continue to do very small little things to let the University of Chicago know that we needed a trauma center now. So these are just many of the creative ways that we continue to resist and fight for what we knew was right. And eventually, 9 of us were released from prison after 2 days. Very smelly, but very happy to be free. And the next day, after we were released, we took our protest straight to Rockefeller Chapel, where the University of Chicago was having its alumni ceremony. At Rockefeller, President Zimmer was a keynote speaker. And so a group of students had went inside first to make the same demand that we were demanding when we locked ourselves inside of the admin building. We wanted to meet with Zimmer. We wanted to meet with Polanski. We wanted to meet with the decision maker. We were tired of seeing Leif Elsmo. And we knew that these people had a responsibility to answer us on an issue that wasn't about politics, right? What people a lot of times forget is that the Trauma Center campaign is about people's lives. People are dying. And it was obvious to us that the lack of attention and the lack of movement on this issue on behalf of the University of Chicago meant that they didn't feel like Black Lives Matter. And so once they removed the students, members of STOP, FLY, SHE, JCUA, and other allies walked into the church, walked straight up to the altar while Zimmer was giving his speech. I remember that was the first time I had ever seen him in the flesh. That's real life. After 5 years, that was the first time I had ever seen Rob Zimmer actually in person. And I remember the only thing that I could say to him was, "Why won't you meet with us?" And instead of responding to me or responding to us or agreeing to meet, he decided to close the event down. Wait, not before they instructed the band to play over us, which thank God I have a very loud voice. And did all they could do to wait us out and see that we would leave. And of course, we did not leave, and we understood, and I understood this moment, and the reason why I took this picture was because I understood it to be anti-Blackness in operation, right? If we were people of their community, and I'm just being very frank, right? And I've said this plenty of times before. If this was an issue that predominantly affected young white people, people who are of the university's constituency community, this would be an issue that they would take up very seriously. And because they just walked out on us, it was as if they was walking out on the fact that hundreds of, if not thousands, of both young Black people and Black people, period, are dying on the South Side and absolutely needed some type of care. And so, despite that moment, we continued on the rest of the day. We marched from President Zimmer's house, very beautifully, as we do, to the lunch tents in which many alumni had gathered to have alumni weekend and eat and be merry and give big bucks to the University of Chicago. And so we decided to go inside of a tent. That's Alex handling a police officer. We decided to go into the tent, and once we got into the tent, we decided to have a die-in. We wanted to show them that this is what is happening, and that anytime that we've done a die-in, and we've done them ever since the beginning of the campaign, the purpose of our die-ins in this particular case, and I think what people use die-ins for generally, is that this is symbolizing the lives that are being lost. And in the case of the university, there are lives being lost right at this hospital's front doorstep. One of the biggest world-renowned hospitals in the world is allowing hundreds and thousands of people to die right at its doorstep. And once again, they raised the, I think it was Michael Jackson playing, turned it up really loud. And that was fine because we were there as symbols. And we were there to show that the University of Chicago has a responsibility to young people. It has a responsibility to black people, especially when we're talking about a hospital that occupies the majority of our neighborhoods and a hospital that seeks things like the Presidential Obama Library and wants to include that library in its own very legacy. The fact that the University of Chicago waited 5 years, ignored us for 5 years, even decided in the first place to close its trauma center, a decision that was based off of profit and not over people's lives. We recognize this institution as a morally bankrupt institution, and we see President Zimmer leading the charge and the lack of morals and values for life and the life of black people. And so I put this in here because I thought it was cool. But we absolutely, we know and we acknowledge that even though the university is a private institution, right? Right. Until tax time comes. We know that when we're living in a time where we're talking about Black Lives Matter, we have to go directly to those institutions where we acknowledge that institutional racism exists. And we have to be angry, and we have to yell, and we have to scream, and we have to demand that they make Black Lives Matter. And what I learned from Alumni Weekend, or what was affirmed for me, was that this was an institution that didn't necessarily feel that Black Lives Matter, and it definitely didn't practice making Black Lives Matter. But not only was that a problem within the top of the institution, as I stated earlier, it trickles down straight through the very community of the institution. And so I want Marla, who did not participate in the barricading of the sit-in, I call it a very extreme sit-in, that took place in Levy Hall, but who definitely experienced just how much institutional racism was rampant throughout this community. For those who may not know, may not have heard, Marla was assaulted by someone who was at the alumni award ceremony. And I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to give Marla an opportunity to talk about her experience. But what I would like to do is show the video, because we have it on video that we weren't really able to publicize when it happened. But now you guys get to watch it here today. Anna, you can stop.
No, you should just another 30 seconds.
Marla says let it go another 30. the same police force that crawled through a window to handcuff 9 people who were sitting in, demanding a meeting, was the same police force that, as you can clearly see, let this man who assaulted a woman walk away. They allowed him to get on that bus that you guys saw, in which one of the fly people who you've seen in the video proceeded with other young fly people to stand in front of that bus. And they let the police know basically that nothing on that street was going to move until they arrested that man. And it was because of them that he was then arrested and charged with a simple assault.
Yeah, simple battery misdemeanor.
So I say that to say, or to reiterate, how deep the institutional racism runs and how it's practiced. And then at this time, I'll turn it over to Marla to further give us details.
Hi, good evening. I'm Marla Bramble, and I'm on staff with Jewish Council on Urban Affairs, or JCUA. We're a part of the Trauma Care Coalition. And I wanted to lay out what happened, because to the same points that Veronica is stating, it really shows how intentional. This is not an accident, the way that these incidents played out. So that morning we were there for an action, and I was outside of the action. And this man, Dr. Zajac, comes out of Rockefeller Chapel, where the action had been happening, and just starts screaming at people, in people's faces, looking at them in the face, saying, "Fuck you, fuck you." And he lunged at someone with a camera. He tried to kick the person with the camera. And then very quickly, I don't know why he decided me, but very quickly he punched me, and he punched me in the chest. And I was reeling, I was in shock, and fell over. And when I fell over, I called out to stop this man. And he just, as you saw in the video, he just walked, right? He just walked with his briefcase and the other man who was with him. When I called out to the police officer, at the time I thought it was a Chicago police officer, and I called out and I asked for him to stop. I called out and I said, "I'm disabled. Stop this man. He just hit me. I want to press charges." But instead, while I was standing no further from where I am here to this camera, as I was calling on the officer to make this arrest, he slapped me across the mouth in front of the officer. Okay? And I could not believe that he felt that he was entitled to punch and slap a woman with all of these witnesses, and then the slap in front of an officer. And he then continued to leave. The officer was not going to do anything. And as Veronica said, if there had not been a number of our brave allies who literally stood in front of the CTA bus, he would have gotten away. As I said, I have a disability. I'm an amputee. I use a prosthesis to get around. And the reason I say that is because it's pretty apparent. While he may not notice when he first punched me, you can tell when I'm going down the stairs. As much as I always tried to correct that, you can tell. And he felt, again, no problem punching and slapping a woman and someone with a disability. And this is a doctor, and this is the president emeritus of the Medical Sciences of the University of Chicago. This is who we found this person to be after the fact. The officer wasn't going to do anything. He said that he was calling his sergeant. I'm sure no one had any confusion about what they were going to do when people were peacefully protesting on campus. They didn't have to call any sergeant. So what we know from that we know it's clear. They have their marching orders. They know who they follow. That is okay to punch and slap a woman, someone with a disability, rather than upholding the law evenly for everyone. So several minutes later, the University of Chicago security sergeant arrived and asked me to identify this man on the bus, which I did. Only after asking me 3 times and me saying, this man, 3 times, did they pull him off the bus. He was eventually taken to the UCPD station, and I was taken in another car. I was not allowed to have anyone ride with me. I don't like using the word victim about myself, but that's what it was in this situation. I asked for another woman to come with me, and they would not let anyone come with me. When they took me to the station, I was in the station alone in the basement with 2 male officers. I asked for a female officer, and they said there was none. So again, Dr. Zaitchuk is President Emeritus of the Medical and Biological Sciences Alumni Association of the University of Chicago, and neither he nor the university should be above the law. We all live by the same laws. Dr. Russ Zaitchuk's power and connection should not prevent him from being bound by this same law and social compact that we all agree to abide by. He should be held accountable for his individual behavior, and the University of Chicago should answer for the unprofessional behavior of its security officers. That is why I immediately filed charges and why the Trauma Care Coalition is demanding that the University of Chicago lift the ban, among many things that Veronica articulated. However, following 3 court dates, I do not feel that justice was served. The assistants, I was not allowed to have my own state's attorney. When you are a victim, you have, I was not allowed to have my own lawyer. The state's attorney is actually prosecuting because people broke their law. So I couldn't have a lawyer per se. They did not want to go to trial. They didn't want to go to trial. They just said nothing would happen. He's an upstanding member of the community. He's 77. He has nothing on his record. It's not going to happen. So they pretty much talked me down in a room by myself, again, that we wouldn't go to trial, and instead he would have therapy. And I said, what? This is okay, while 9 people demonstrate peaceably and are in jail and handcuffed, and handcuffed for 7 of those hours and in jail for almost 48 hours. They asked if I'd feel better with an apology, and I said no. That just wouldn't cut it. After some time, I agreed on an apology that I could circulate through social media, because I felt that by having that apology, it would be an admission of guilt if we could not get that through the court system. However, his apology was so weak, I did not even feel strong in circulating it. Some of you may have seen it. I'll just read the first couple sentences. He made contact with me. I apologize to Ms. Bramble for making contact with her last June at the University of Chicago. That was making contact. I had no intention to cause physical or emotional harm to Ms. Bramble or any other trauma center protester. Any contact with Ms. Bramble was unintentional and without malice. I was very upset about this disruption of the Alumni Awards ceremony, an event that recognizes the lifetime achievements of many dedicated former alumni and the lack of security provided by the university. So he was provoked and made contact for that, and pretty much got off the hook. And as another person who did civil disobedience said, so I continue to see my probation officer, and he does nothing when he punched and slapped someone. Okay, so Again, on June 6th, the Trauma Care Coalition held a peaceful demonstration calling for a level 1 adult trauma center, and we were met with physical violence. We are entitled to our First Amendment civil rights to lawfully assemble and demand change without fear of bodily harm. If we cannot do so or depend on officers of the law to act to defend those rights when they are violated, then we are in serious danger of losing those rights in our country. It is unconscionable that 9 demonstrators participated in peaceful civil disobedience and were not only arrested, but held in jail for nearly 48 hours, while a prestigious alum physically assaults a person, commits acts of violence, and almost walks away, and effectively walks away with the lack of charges. Throughout the country, universities are employing police forces to serve their private ends. This manifests through banned freedom of speech, inordinate arrest and jail time, brutality, and barring peaceful demonstrators from campus for life. What is the university demonstrating? That it values money, prestige, and reinforcing privilege over freedom of speech and exchange of ideas. If this is not the case, then change your course of action. University of Chicago, it's time to lift the ban, and it's time to raise the age of the Children's Trauma Center. As someone with a disability my whole life, I have faced bullying and stood up to people since the time I was small. I would not expect that when I am on campus of a university, the president emeritus is someone who I have to stand up to. But this is what I continue to do, and as an organizer, I continue to fight with others for what is right and for what is just. This is why I press charges and continue to speak out. Thank you.
So, as the court system does all the time, in Marla's case and in many cases, and especially cases with black folks, they got it wrong and they failed Marla. But I want to invite Alex to kind of speak to the one very small time the court actually got it right.
So, good evening. My name is Alex Goldenberg. I'm an alum of the university, the class of 2000. And
What you say?
I first want to give a shout out to other alumni who are here, who participate in that civil disobedience. We have Calvin over there, Greg, Caroline. Is Jack here?
No, she had to work.
They participated in that action of civil disobedience and are doing so tonight as well, right? Like all of us who are banned are technically participating in civil disobedience by being here because we are breaking a law. And I want to also just point out that whether you realize it or not, sitting here, all of us have a lot of power. I think the community that's organizing to demand resources from this university, and you as students and allies, and we as alumni, through this campaign have been able to shift $40 million worth of resources, right? And there's, I think, so much more that we're capable of shifting and moving and influencing if we put our minds to it. So I just want people to really dream big about what's possible and realize that this is the most powerful institution on the South Side, one of the most in the city and in the world, really. And what we're talking about are policies that influence the whole world. I mean, this guy Russ Sadchik, who beat Marla, was actually a doctor in El Salvador in the 80s. Where he was, supporting our government's imperialist policies, putting down people's movements. And that is the same policies that this university came up with, right? I mean, they are the architects of policies in Chile and all over the world that have put down people's movements like they're doing here in their own backyard, with this ban and with other policies. So I just think it's important for people to keep that in mind. That's definitely been part of my political development. My family is from Cuba and Argentina, and kind of the way the U.S. has really taken down people movements there has influenced a lot of how I think about organizing. And this work you know, you don't have to look there to try to make that change. It's happening right here. Like there's neighbors who are demanding this change and who are challenging, you know, the very neoliberal policies that are destroying our world. And so we have a chance to change that. So I just want people to make sure you recognize that and seize this moment that we're in. And so in my case, you know, when you're charged with trespassing, if you don't have much of a record, you're typically offered supervision, which means you just don't get in trouble for a few months and then you can get it expunged. But me and one or two others who were arrested have had a little more experience, so we weren't offered that deal. And so, you know, I was originally gonna, I would have taken that deal, but since I wasn't offered that deal, I was offered what would have been called conditional discharge, which means it would have stayed on my record forever. And so the judge was basically like, you know, why not take this to trial? It's very unlikely that you'll get a worse outcome than conditional discharge, so might as well just take it to trial and see what happens, roll the dice. So I decided to do that. You know, whenever we do these actions, we have lawyers from the National Lawyers Guild, which are free lawyers who are committed to protecting civil liberties. Is there one here today? Yeah, we do have a legal observer here tonight from the NLG. Shout out to them. So they defended all of us. And they basically made the argument that the reason why we did this action was because it was necessary to save lives of people dying. And so there's a defense called the necessity defense, which means that you have to break some law and do some harm, because if you don't, a greater harm will result. And so we had to barricade ourselves inside this lobby, because if we didn't, you know, people would continue to die on the South Side, as they are every day. And you know, I've seen that argument tried before and failed, so you know, I thought we'll try it. But amazingly, it worked, and the judge was persuaded. I think it definitely helped, of course, that a month earlier, the university actually realized its responsibility to do something about this and decided that, you know, they would open up a trauma center on the South Side, which only, you know, legitimized the call that we were doing and the action that we were doing. And so the judge was persuaded, and I was found not guilty. And so I hope that that's encouraging and emboldens others to take similar stands in the future, because you will be called upon to do so. So thank you.
So, I was offered the plea and I took it.
Me too. 'Cause we suckers.
But what I didn't expect afterwards was how the university was gonna really try to strong arm me with this ban, right? And as Alex says, in all actuality, there were 9 of us who were a part of the protest. There were 8 of us who are indubitably banned, right? But in my particular case, it seems to be that any time that I have tried to be on campus since that ban, I've been threatened with arrest. The first time was not too long ago. We had a simple meeting. It was a coalition meeting. The students had booked a space. As I was walking up the space, it was in Harper. I don't know whether it is, but I'm sure y'all do. It was in Harper, and as I was walking up, an officer was coming out of the building. He locked eyes with me and followed me around, and proceeded to call for backup, as if I had some type of weaponry or something, and insisted that if I did not leave, that you know, folks were gonna get locked up. I'm assuming me. And I think what was very interesting about that is that I was there, Tori, who's also banned, was there, Alex, who's also banned, was there, and another person from JCUA who was banned was also there. And the officer, according to Alex, looked directly Alex with his Trauma Center Now shirt on and was like, "You're fine, but she can't be here." And so we decided to leave that day. And then I was invited last month to speak at a SJP event. Shout out to SJP. Their event they were having during Palestinian Liberation Week, and I was very excited. Paige May was supposed to be there. Omar, who I won't butcher his last name at all, was speaking, and I was excited. And that Monday before that Thursday, members of SJP was pulled into a meeting with the administration, and Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, but your RSO was threatened to be taken away, right?
Not quite.
Not quite?
But if we want you, then
yeah. So the threat was... Okay. So the threat was if you bring her, we'll take your RSO status. They also made you guys have extra security to make sure I wasn't there. Yeah. 5 officers. You guys had to pay for 5 police officers to make sure that I didn't speak at a panel. And, you know, part of me was very frustrated by this. I was frustrated. I live to organize. That's all I do. I'm staff at Stop and Fly. It's my job. It's my life. It's my passion. And so to feel like, you know, to do what I believe so hardly to do could possibly land me in jail, right? And I could see the times when I'm chained to something. Okay, I expect that. But I was coming to speak. We went to a meeting with sandwiches and paper. There was no harm at all to be done. And so, you know, the ban definitely needs to be lifted. And the university also needs to give a very public apology to the people that is banned. But I think the bigger conversation is, right, what does the university need to do about its policy and its practices when it comes to young black people? And especially young black people who absolutely have the freedom to protest. And so, with that, I wanted to ask Tori to kind of talk about what do you feel as a young black person who has protested this university, who lives in the community? How do you feel you're viewed by the University of Chicago?
People. Essay question number 1. Can you repeat that?
In very short way, as a black person, how do you feel you're viewed by the University of Chicago?
Chicago, they suck. And I guess their response to me is that I suck too. They don't really like black people. They don't really like young black people at the most. They don't really like young black poor people even more. Mostly they don't like Veronica, so I guess she's number 1 on their list, and I guess we're number 2. Chicago. So to be very blunt and direct, it's like with the whole Black Lives Matter campaign, it's like to Chicago, it's just like, oh, that's cute, bye-bye with that. They don't value black life. They don't care about black people. They don't care about black young poor people. They look at us as, at the most, free labor or cheap labor, and that's it. That's all we are to them. We're just, to be very blunt and very frank, slaves. New slaves to them. And just in times of, back in the times of slavery, and not this times of slavery, but like old day slavery, not new day slavery, we are, if we die, we die. We'll just pick up a new nigga and just have them work for us. That's about it.
Thank you for that. And so, Alex, could you speak to why it's very important that young black people continue to push institutions like the University of Chicago, and why it's important for students and allies to support them?
I mean, the university has a responsibility, right? And if it's being called out, and so I think as allies, we have a responsibility to support the effort to make them follow through on that responsibility. You know, like Tori said, in this moment of where Black Lives Matter is a central issue, and finally being allowed to take up some space in the national conversation. It's a time that the university has to respond. We're also this year going to be laying the groundwork for the Obama Library and what that's going to include. And so that will be the legacy of the first black president of this country. And so for them to be allowed to get away with these stark contradictions where they're denying access to care to young people. I mean, a 16-year-old shot across the street cannot come here to get treatment. And now when you ask Dean Polanski about his commitment that he made last December to raise the age limit, he says, well, right now we're focusing on the Holy Cross Trauma Center. It's like, okay, but there are still people across the street who are getting shot and still need care, and you said that you would help them, and now you're just avoiding the question. It's not right. There's a lot that isn't right. So at the very least, they need to do that, and there's so much more. And that's kind of what I was referencing before, is that let's start there. Let's get them to raise this age limit of the trauma center, and dream bigger. They employ 14,000 people, this institution. They're an engine for what could be economic development. Like, this could be career paths for people to move out of poverty, right, and to show that their lives are valued. But it's not doing that. It continues to shut people out. And so it will only change if those most affected call for that change, and they are. And so what are we going to do to support that?
So that being said, I wanted to kind of turn it over because also very interested in this being a broad discussion, right? So at this point, if folks have questions for us, you're welcome to have questions to ask them. And I also want to encourage especially students of color and particularly black students, right, to kind of, if you so choose, want to kind of give your take, right? What does the institutional racism look like at this school? And what can students start to do to challenge that institutional racism? So if folks want to answer that question, just feel free to stand up and do so. And if folks have questions for us, you want to answer that question?
I just want to say something really simple. Shut shit down. Like we do.
That's fair. That's true. Yeah, and if people have questions for us, please feel free to ask at this time.
That's a question.
Go ahead.
My name is Isaac Stein. I'm the Chicago Root, and I have two questions for the broad panel. They both relate to the proposal for the Holy Cross Trauma Center. So I've spoken with Dr. Rawadi at Sinai. I also spoke with President Zimmer on Monday, and he completely ducked a lot of the very essential questions.
Of course.
Actually, so Rawadi, what interested me are things like, where is the $40 million going to go? Like, where is the university's money going to be spent? How is upkeep going to be split between the university and Sinai? And also, what happens if it loses money? And they never made any of this clear because they haven't published a contract. So my understanding is that the TCC wants to organize a council to gather community input on the facility. My question for you is, what are you soliciting for in terms of input? Like, do you want to talk, are you looking to see, like, is it insurance coverage, is it cost of services? Like, what do you want to know from the community? My second question is, there's going to be a Region 11 EMS meeting on December 17th. And the UCMC and Sinai and a bunch of different hospitals are going to be convening to talk about the proposal. And I wanted to know if you had plans to demonstrate.
You want to answer this first question? And I can take the
Okay.
last one.
In terms of the input, I mean, we don't we believe that it's necessary for there to be accountability throughout this process. So there's, as we saw with the commitment to raise the age limit, there's no guarantee that something is going to happen unless we continue to pressure and make it happen. And so that's a real big part of why there needs to be community input, for there to be transparency and a voice for people to speak directly to the decision makers and make sure that this thing is happening. Sustainability of the trauma center is certainly something that we're going to be focusing on to make sure that it is sustainable. I don't know if you saw the slides from the talk Polanski gave about the role of a modern hospital in urban. So that had some of the breakdown of the costs that you were asking about. So according to that, the $40 million is really towards rebuilding the building at Holy Cross, and then the major ongoing cost of a trauma center is the doctors, and so the university would provide most of the specialties, and Holy Cross would provide some of the doctors. So the majority of the ongoing costs supposedly would be bared by the U of C, but like you said, there's no contract, nothing's public, and so that's why we need community input and accountability to ensure that that is the case and that commitment is there. We are optimistic about Sinai just because they have a good track record on the west side as actually valuing community care, which is something the hospital really does not. I mean, the whole business model of the University of Chicago medicine is to cater to rare diseases that attract high-paying patients. That is their business model, essentially. When there's actually tremendous need to provide community care for low-income people on the south side. And so the only way they'll actually change that at all will be through tremendous amount of pressure. And so we're a little more optimistic about Sinai because they actually have their model is the community and providing care. So.
And to the last question, do we plan on demonstrating? There are no planned protests as of now. The protests, as I stated before, are the way that we, in a way that we kind of build our power and flex our power, right? And so we are also in a stage where we are revisioning our strategy and really trying to make sure that we go about this the right way. The past 5 years were gruesome as someone who's organized this on this campaign from start to finish. Planning those protests the way that we do are just the struggle. And do we want to be here every other 3 months screaming and hollering and doing those things in the cold and the snow? Realistically, no. Will we do it? Absolutely, if we have to, when we feel like our voices are being ignored. Yeah. So right now we don't have any planned out protests. No. If there are any other questions, feel free to just stand up, or if you also want to answer the question I proposed, feel free to stand up and do that too.
Can I just give an anecdote about how special this place is?
Absolutely.
So, right now, I just looked on Twitter, and right now a group of students led by the Black Students Association of Princeton are having a sit-in in their president's office to demand changes for more racial justice at that university. And I'm sure that at some point in the next couple of days they're going to get them out of that office, but what struck me is, there's probably like 20 of them in there, and when they went in this afternoon, they were allowed to go in, and the president of Princeton University stayed and spoke with them. He didn't agree with them, but he spoke with them for an hour this afternoon. And, I'm sure that institution is not great, I don't know anything about it, but just compare that to the kind of response that you get to the things that Veronica and everyone else were describing. And think about what kind of priorities this institution, even compared to institutions that, are like it and are fucked up in all sorts of ways. But think about the response that we get here. So, piece of lives.
Hi, I'm Holly. I've actually also been banned from campus for a short time for going to the lovely psychiatric institution, Lakeshore Hospital on the north side. And so I guess, and I've also had this long legal battle with the university for other things. Recently I was informed that they emailed my parents when I took a leave of absence that I shouldn't be on Twitter criticizing them so much, or else I may not be able to come back to school, because freedom of speech and academic expression and stuff. Anyway, so I guess my answer to the question is a student of color as an underrepresented minority on this campus, what I've just really put my faith into is just surviving every day and realizing that's an act of resistance. And I think like you all said, being on this campus right now it's simple, but it's an act of resistance. And so I think our existence and our presence is really just powerful and can be powerful. And also just really managing with myself, like what things can I do that also keep myself safe, I guess, and seeing what is like really actually feasible for me, because I don't know, sometimes things aren't really that easy. So that's my point .02.
Darius, I'm with Fly. I got a question to pose to Veronica, Tori, and Alex. Most campaigns that I know, they usually run for like 1 year, 2 years, right? As you said several times, that this campaign went on for 5 long, hard years. What was some things that motivated you and actually kept you wanting to keep fighting? Because I know doing this work, there might have been some moments where you had like that effort feeling, right? You know, so that question is posed to the three of you. Not trying to X you out or anything, but the 4 or 5 years, right? Like, what kept you going?
You want to start?
Sure. I think for me, what kept me going was that, you know, I think Fly is a very unique group, right? Not to say that we are, you know, not
The best? Yes, we are.
no, not bigging us up or anything, but I think that we're young people who, when people talk about the directly impacted, we're the directly impacted, right? So we live in the hood. We're poor. We don't have no privileges. Many of us don't have college educations. Some of us don't even have high school educations, right? But we're, with all of that, right, and dealing with that every day, we come to our space, we commit, we dedicate, and we do what needs to be done. And so I think it, you know, it was y'all, it was us that a lot of times for me, you know, held me up. And then outside of that, going home to 79th and Manistee on the east side, and it being everything that it is, was a constant reminder to me that there needs to be a trauma on the south side. You know, I had a friend who was gunned down in April this year, right outside of his home. Wasn't a drive-by shooting. 2 people waited for him to walk outside of his house and they gunned him down. Those are the things that I carry when I decide to do this type of work. Because I know that he deserves better than that. We deserve better than that. And I know that before I'll get anywhere, you know, on Facebook, talking about put the guns down, I need to actually actively do what I can do to better my community. And for me, it's organizing.
So, let me start with what got me in the first place. My best friend tricked me as usual. In the food. She promised food, so I joined Fly. So usually there's food. Never drinks, but there's food. I guess what kept me around for so long is that when I joined Fly, I just wasn't Afro rocking, Trauma Center Now t-shirt wearing, Black Lives Matter, Black Power person. I was the girl with the pigtails and the pastries and the really little glasses. I didn't know anything at all. Ooh, don't throw shade.
We doing the whole train.
I didn't know anything. And, well, I didn't know anything about Black Power. I know a couple of things about a couple of mathematicians and all that, but the longer I stayed in Fly, the more aware of, like, how crappy America is. How messed up it is to be poor, Black, female in America. And not even with just the Trauma Center campaign, like, actually the first march I was a part of is the whole reason why I continue to stay around these crazy people. Watching Black people outside demanding, actually coming together with other communities, like, shout out to She, JCUA, Coco, wherever they at. No shade though. Just communities coming together and demanding something, and then an institution that's like U of Chicago that's like very well off and can provide this resource without it even being like a crumb out of their bread basket, and just them saying no, that like really pissed me off. And Veronica will tell you I have like this amount of chill. What a chill at? This amount of chill. I have like no chill, and because my people are dying, and I just refuse to lay down and continue to watch my people be oppressed, my people be killed, my people be enslaved. And Fly is like the kickstart, was like the kickstart of why I joined and why I continue to like organize and why I have like no social life whatsoever. And that's why I do this. That's why I've been a part of this work, and that's why I've been pushing forward for 5 years. And if I have to, I'll continue to push forward for 5 more years. I'll continue to get arrested by these racist ass police. I'll continue to challenge the power structure. I will have no chill until my people are free. So I'm about her.
It's a good question, just because 5 years, is a long time, and because this is something that most people describe as completely unwinnable, and a lot of people here at the university as not even necessary, which is kind of crazy. I mean, the first year, all the arguments we were getting from, even from students was that, this wouldn't really save that many lives. I mean, as long as, what's the difference between 20 minutes and an hour as long as you're getting to a doctor? There's some study which shows that that's the case. And people believing this, absurdity. And, it's expensive. I mean, $40 million is a lot of money, and so why would this, scrappy little group of young people be able to get that from this university? So, but yeah, for me, I guess it's a combination of the drive and the will of the people kind of leading this fight and their commitment to it that motivates me. For me, that like what fuels me is when people are just really willing to throw down and just and passionate, and that's kind of what this work brings out. And the memory of Damian Turner, who was the founder of Fly, who is passing, was the catalyst for this whole campaign. And remembering him and his drive has also, really kind of motivated me. I met him when I was a student here at the U of C, and he was just a beautiful person who would be, with us today, organizing and fighting, if not for the health inequities and institutional racism that we're talking about today. So I'd also be curious to you, sir, why did you stick around for 5 years? Darius?
Yeah, Revlon.
5 years is such a long time, right? It's a long time to be fighting. It's a long time to be losing. For a long time, I felt like I was losing, that we were losing this battle, and that we were down. So many times we come to these meetings and we get brick walled, and they say no, 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 no. That can really take it from you, and I guess what really kept me pushing was that we was doing this for Damian Turner. We are doing this for Damian Turner. We are doing this for the people who are directly affected by it. Me, myself, right? Me staying up on the southeast side, I have a long distance to travel with. I'm riding my bike and I get hit by a car, I have a long way to travel to get treated. So when the question is posed, like, why did I stick around? Why did I keep fighting? I had to, I couldn't leave, I couldn't stop base building. I couldn't stop outreaching. I couldn't stop fighting, because if we were the ones who was leading this and we step back and we say skip it, then that campaign is gone. Then the fight is gone. Then that fire is gone. So it's not why, it's like, it's a need, it's a want. I had to, I want to when people need it. And that's pretty much why I stayed with the Trauma Center campaign. Fly is gonna keep on kicking. You know, Fly is here. Fly is gonna keep on kicking. I'm one of the co-founders myself, so that's another reason why this campaign is so strong to me. You know, it's something that us as a collective started, and if I fall back on something that I helped start, then what would I be?
So I want to reiterate the question, right, that I posed to everyone, right? What can be done on this campus about institutional racism, right? 'Cause I know y'all had y'all solidarity with Mizzou event, right? But what actual action can take place on this campus in terms of institutional racism, be it through the Raising the Age, the Trauma Center campaign, or other issues?
Don't all answer at once.
What?
Well, a lot of campaigns start with the issue of resources, and I think that's completely correct. You know, got to pressure them to build a trauma center. Students could organize to control where the university's money is invested, whether that's climate, taking money out of fossil fuels because of the crisis of climate change, human rights issues like the Israeli occupation of Palestine, or the U.S. prison system. Students around the country have pressured their universities to do that. Not many have concretely taken action, but a lot of student governments have passed bills. But I think long term we also need to look at like changing just sort of fundamentally what the university is, and it's a question of power. And I think that when you have power, then you can also do things like determine what's taught in the courses and who's teaching them. And I think that's a longer term fight. If you're fighting white supremacy on campus, I think a big place that we have to look to is like, yeah, curriculum, students, faculty. Like, why aren't there as many black professors? Why do we still learn white supremacist history even at such a elite fancy university as this? I think that, yeah, part of the struggle is, yeah, just taking control and starting a long process of changing things.
My name is Dell. I don't go here, but I'm a recent graduate from my school. What I think could be done here and at other schools is at the lower level, like the social level. A lot of times, just the social culture of people can change, like the institutional culture. So if it's not going to happen from top down, it could happen from bottom up. So what can start happening is that students who are allies to the black community, no matter what race they are, white, Latino, whatever your race is, if you can help change the culture of anti-blackness on this campus by practicing pro-blackness, like you see your friend making a racist comment, or you see a professor exuding racist behavior, or you catch yourself being anti-black. Change that. Do something about that. Check yourself. Check your friend. Let them know that's not cool. And engage with each other more. And even blacks, don't be in so much, a bubble sometimes, or expect other races to be racist. I do say stick together, but also be open to the people that's not us, that's trying to help us. Because that will encourage them to continue to help us. But just changing the culture of anti-blackness on the social level, the cultural level here at the school, might just encourage the professors and the staff members to actually change policies and whatever they can do as well. It could start from the bottom and move up, because it's more of you guys than it is of them.
Mm-hmm. I saw. Is that Jose?
Yeah, that's Jose. Hey, how you doing? So a group convened by Vicente Perez, various members of the Organization of Black Students on Campus, and OLAS came together last year when events took place that were rooted in racism against Latinos and racism against black people. And we made a demand. We had a list of various demands that was composed of long-term goals and short-term goals. One of the short-term goals being a campus climate survey, and this would have included a survey basically to assess the diversity and inclusion climate on campus, and it was supposed to take place by the end of spring quarter. By the end of fall quarter. What was said in the original articles that I've dug up, but now apparently it's going to take place by the middle of spring quarter, and the university uses these tactics many times to drag out demands, to drag out addressing demands, and they use these tactics, of delivering things when new students come on campus. And try to make it, seem like, oh, that's a thing of the past, so that those who were really involved in it, become fourth years, become third years, and graduate. So I think one thing we can do on campus is to encourage our first years and our second years to be politically aware of the institutionalized racism on campus, and to be aware of some of the history that has occurred on this campus that has myself as a black woman, have been stopped about 3 times by UCPD and had my things searched because apparently I look like a student from Kenwood and not like a student who attends this university. And even if I was a student I do look young, but even as a student who looks young and who is black, why do you feel the need to search someone who this community belongs to? And I think that we really need to make sure that first and second years are aware of these issues, so that when third and fourth years graduate, these issues don't subside and the university can take a breath that the students who were involved in this are gone. And then as far as our list of demands, they included having a more diverse faculty. There's an African studies abroad program that is actually in Europe, and that's crazy as fuck. So that needs to obviously change. And so I think that, and those are just some of the specific things. And also having during O Week, usually there are these Chicago Life meetings where students are posed the question, what do you do if you see 2 dark figures approaching you? And that's fucked up, because that's like, addressing black people, 2 dark figures. It used to be 2 black people, and then they changed it to 2 dark figures, which is also, again, rooted in that anti-blackness that was spoken of before. So I think that allies should reach out to the black people in the community and the black people on campus in order to receive direction, and not to first take direction for themselves, so that they can center black people in the discussion and center those most vulnerable. And then we're also going to start revamping up that list of demands, and they're going to include, hopefully they're going to include discussions of lifting bans on people who have been banned from campus for free speech, which is what they practice so much when they address the situation with Vicente being harassed by people dressing up as Latinos on Halloween. That was free speech to them, and they put out a whole big ass statement about freedom of expression, but yet someone expresses their freedom on campus and they get banned for it. Or we get threatened with, some of our tuition being taken away, or we get threatened with other things. And then also maybe what we can do to have more funding is to decrease UCPD's budget by 50% and reallocate it towards things of the trauma center, so that they don't have the ability to harass black people on campus and in their own fucking neighborhood. So yeah, I think that if I see a lot of students here, I think that those are some ways that you can start to get involved, is to take direction from the Trauma Center campaign and take direction from the upcoming initiatives that are going to be set in place by black community members of the campus like myself and the Organization of Black Students and OLAS. So I hope to see you soon when next quarter those discussions start taking place as we get closer to the institution of the Campus Climate Survey.
And so with all of that being said, right, so beautifully, I would like to invite Anna to give a call to action and close out this discussion piece. No, hold it. Go ahead.
Cool. So thank you everyone for coming out again. Like this couldn't have happened if you guys didn't come, because if it's just like us meeting as a coalition, the police come and be like, you have to go now.
Yeah.
So it's your presence here, which is like why the police didn't come and like arrest people or like make us leave. So thank you for coming again. Moving forward, thank you also for like sharing all your great ideas. And on the trauma center issue, thank you for coming out, and it's important to continue mobilizing on this issue, because I think we've seen with this broken promise on raising the age that if there isn't like continued pressure, like these promises get broken very quickly. Even with the Holy Cross Trauma Center, which is not an entire solution to the South Side Trauma Desert, like it's not open yet, like we don't know what it's going to look like yet. If there's not like any sort of timeline, if there's not like continued like student accountability on this issue, like it could just disappear, like so many of their broken promises in the past. So the next thing you can do to help on this is we're approaching the anniversary of when they promised to raise the age, and it was supposed to have been raised by now, so they said it would take a year. So they've taken no steps towards doing that. They've lied about it, and they're basically like not willing to do it anymore. And that's like a really big threat to like having any sort of like successful activism. If like they like promise things and they just take them away and there's like not like outcry. So to mark that anniversary, we are going to have some sort of protest details to come about, and please come if you're interested in helping setting those details. So I'm going to pass around commitment cards to come. It will be December 3rd at noon to like mark the anniversary. And also they're like sort of like little postcards that we'll send to President Zimmer and Dean Polonsky. And also be sure to sign the sign-up sheet before you leave. So I'll pass these around. Thank you. Thank you, Anna.
So once again, I'd like to say thank you to all of you for being here and for your continued support. And just know that even though our presence here wasn't met with police, that the band is still very real, and that institutional racism is still very real, as what we've discussed tonight. And I hope to see you all in future trauma center stuff. And if you aren't involved in campus, I would highly recommend getting involved with SHE, right? Because when we talk about allies, SHE is one of those allies that know how to take that direction, to ask what do you need from us, and then execute that beautifully, right? So without that, thank you for coming. Good night.